Every single year, gardeners buy the wrong plants for their pots, not because they don't care, not because they don't try, but because no one ever told them the truth that some flowers are built for containers and some flowers are just quietly suffering inside them. Today, we're fixing that. Intro. Welcome back to Rooted Aura, where we grow things slowly, intentionally, and beautifully. I want to walk you through 9 flowers today, 9 specific plants that don't just survive in pots, they genuinely thrive in them. More blooms, longer seasons, stronger color, less struggle. Some of these you've probably grown before. Some you've walked right past at the nursery without a second glance. And for every single one, I'll tell you not just what it needs, but why it needs it. Because that's the part that actually changes how you grow. Whether you're working with a small balcony, a shaded porch, a sunny front stoop, or a few pots along a driveway, there is something here F or U. Let's get into it. Cherry Blossom Flower 1 Geraniums. Soft zoom onto terracotta pots with deep red and coral geraniums. I know what you might be thinking. Geraniums? I already know geraniums. Stay with me because the version most gardeners grow is only a fraction of what this plant can actually do. Geraniums, technically pelargoniums, though you'll rarely hear that at your local garden center, are one of the most reliable bloomers you can put in a pot. From early summer all the way through the first hard frost, they push out round, abundant clusters in whites, pinks, corals, salmons, and deep reds that feel almost vintage in the best possible way. They handle heat, they tolerate a little neglect, and if you treat them right, instead of tossing them at the end of autumn, they'll come back to greet you year after year. So why do so many gardeners end up with disappointing geraniums? 2 reasons, and they come up almost every time. The first is watering. Geraniums want to be watered deeply and then left alone until that top inch of soil genuinely dries out. Not the dust on the surface, the actual inch below the surface. If you're watering every single day on a fixed schedule, regardless of what the soil is telling you, you're creating exactly the wet, suffocating environment that leads to crown rot. And geraniums develop it faster than almost anything else on this list. Terracotta pots are genuinely the best home for geraniums. The clay breathes. It regulates moisture naturally in a way plastic simply cannot without very careful management. Aim for a 10-inch pot per plant as your starting point. Anything smaller, and the roots feel cramped by midsummer, and bloom production quietly drops. The second is deadheading. Spent flower clusters need to come off completely, stem and all, not just the faded petals at the top. Leave those old stems on, and your geranium starts putting its energy into making seeds instead of making flowers. 30 seconds per plant every few days. The difference between a dead-headed geranium and a neglected one is not subtle. Feed every 2 weeks with a balanced liquid fertilizer, something close to a 10-10-10 ratio. Container plants can't reach into the soil for what they need the way garden plants can. You are their entire food source. One timing note worth keeping in mind. Don't rush your geraniums outside in spring when the nights are still cold. Below about 50 degrees Fahrenheit, they simply stall. They'll sit in the pot looking exactly the same for weeks, not growing, not rooting in, not building toward a strong season, and that early cold setback can follow the plant for the rest of the growing year. Wait until nights are reliably warm and your geranium steps outside already moving forward. Flower 2 Hellebores. Dreamy close-up of nodding burgundy hellebore blooms dusted with morning frost. Most gardeners never think of hellebores for containers. They picture them tucked into shaded woodland beds, growing quietly beneath trees. And while that's beautiful, it's also a genuinely missed opportunity. Because a well-potted hellebore does something almost nothing else in the container world can do. It blooms in winter. Depending on where you live, a hellebore in a container opens its nodding, jewel-toned flowers anywhere from January through April. Deep burgundy, dusty pink, soft white, quiet green. While everything else on your porch is dormant and waiting for spring, this plant is already flowering. People genuinely don't believe it until they see it for themselves. Containers actually work better for hellebores than garden beds in one important way. Soil control. Hellebores want a rich, well-draining mix with a slightly higher pH than most woodland plants. Building that precise environment across an entire garden bed is difficult. In a pot, every variable is yours to set. A peat-based mix with extra perlite for drainage, top. Add up each spring with a layer of compost, rather than heavy synthetic feeding. That's the environment where hellebores quietly excel. Go deeper, rather than wider, when choosing your container. Hellebores develop substantial root systems as they mature, and they need room to grow downward. 12 inches of depth is the minimum for an established plant. Keep them away from dark-colored pots in sunny locations. Black and deep brown containers absorb heat aggressively, and hellebore roots cooking in a hot pot through summer will suffer even when the foliage above looks completely fine. Shade to partial shade is their natural setting. Bright, indirect light suits them beautifully. Direct afternoon sun scorches the leaves and shortens the bloom period in a way that takes months to show up, by which point the window has already passed. Here's one small maintenance step that makes a big visual difference each year. In late winter, just before new growth and flower stems push up from the base, cut away all the old foliage. The evergreen leaves look attractive through winter, but by February they've collected spots and weathering. Remove them, and the flowers open against a backdrop of fresh, clean new growth. The display shifts from pleasant to genuinely striking. Flower 3 Impatiens. Lush window box overflowing with coral and white impatiens in dappled shade. Impatiens are one of the most purchased container flowers every spring, and also one of the most consistently killed by the same two mistakes, season after season. The first, letting them dry out. Even once, impatiens wilt faster than almost any other container flower when the soil gets too dry. And a plant that wilts severely even a single time loses blooming momentum that takes weeks to rebuild. Consistent moisture isn't a preference for impatiens. It's a non-negotiable, not waterlogged, not soaking, just consistently, reliably moist. Check daily in hot weather. Every other day when things are cooler. The second mistake, too much sun. Standard impatiens collapse in direct afternoon sun within days. The leaf edges go crispy. The flowers drop. The whole plant develops a washed-out, stressed look that more water won't fix, because water isn't the problem. Light is. Standard impatiens belong in shade or partial shade without compromise. Now, New Guinea impatiens are a different story. They're larger, bolder, with bigger blooms and striking foliage, and they handle considerably more sun. Morning light with afternoon shade suits them well. In hotter zones, they're often the stronger choice through summer, outlasting standard varieties through stretches of heat that would send the others into decline. One note worth knowing. Downy mildew has affected commercial impatiens stock across many regions since 2011. Buy from reputable nurseries. Choose disease-resistant varieties where possible. Avoid wetting the foliage when you water, and give plants a little breathing room rather than crowding them together. Packed impatiens in a humid container are the most vulnerable situation for that particular disease. Flower 4 Nasturtiums. Trailing nasturtiums in burnt orange and gold, cascading over the edge of a worn terracotta pot. A lot of us grew nasturtiums as children, from seed, in a paper cup on a classroom windowsill, or in a little patch at the edge of the yard, and then somehow, as adult gardeners, we completely forgot about them. That gap is worth closing. Nasturtiums in the right container setup are among the most rewarding, lowest maintenance flowering plants you can grow from late spring through autumn. And what makes them well suited to containers surprises most people the first time they hear it. They prefer poor soil. Lean, nutrient-light growing medium produces the best looms from a nasturtium. Standard commercial potting mix, the kind many experienced gardeners consider barely adequate for more demanding plants, is genuinely close to ideal for this one. The moment you start adding compost or nitrogen-rich fertilizer, the plant responds by producing enormous, gorgeous, deep green leaves, and almost no flowers. The foliage looks impressive. It is not what you planted for. So the seeds directly into the final container, rather than starting them indoors. Nasturtiums dislike root disturbance, and a seedling that's been transplanted even carefully often stalls for weeks in recovery. Push seeds about an inch into the mix, water them in, and in warm soil, germination follows within days. From there, the plants move quickly. Trailing varieties cascade beautifully over pot edges and out of hanging baskets in long, colorful sweeps with no training needed. Bush varieties stay more upright and compact, better suited to standard pots, where a tidier shape. Works better than an enthusiastic sprawl. Both produce flowers continuously through the season. Full sun to partial shade. Moderate, consistent watering. Minimal feeding throughout. One lovely bonus. The flowers and leaves are both edible. The blooms carry a mild, peppery warmth. The leaves are sharper. Both work beautifully in salads. It's not the reason to grow them, but it is a genuinely charming extra from a plant already earning its place on looks alone. Flower 5 Tornia. Most people walk straight past Tornia at the garden center. It doesn't have the name recognition of Impatiens. It doesn't have the visual familiarity of Geraniums. And the little tag stuck in the pot rarely does justice to what the flowers look like when the plant is in full bloom. That's genuinely the only reason Terrania isn't on every shaded porch and covered patio in the country. Because here's what it can do that almost nothing else can. It blooms prolifically in full shade, not partial shade. D with a few hours of morning light, full shade. For container gardeners working with north-facing spaces, covered porches, deep roof overhangs places where almost nothing flowers reliably, Tornia is one of the most practically useful plants you can grow. The flowers are trumpet-shaped and typically two-toned, purple with yellow, pink with white, coral with cream, and if you look closely inside each bloom, you'll spot the small wishbone-shaped stamens that give it its common name. There's a quiet, intricate beauty to this flower that rewards the gardener who actually slows down to look. The plant stays naturally compact, without much intervention, no constant pinching needed to keep it tidy through a long season. Consistent moisture is the core requirement, and the one place Tornia is less forgiving than some of the others here. Let it dry out significantly, and it drops flowers fast. Check the container daily in hot weather. Light feeding every 2 weeks through the season, and Tornia delivers continuous bloom from late spring right through to autumn, without asking much else in return. In shade container arrangements paired with caladiums and ferns, the scale and texture complement each other beautifully, the delicate trumpet flowers alongside bold tropical foliage, neither one competing for visual dominance. Cherry blossom flower 6 Mandevilla. If one plant on this list genuinely changes the visual scale of a container display, it's Mandevilla. A single plant in a large pot with a simple trellis or obelisk produces more visual impact than most entire container arrangements. Large, vivid, trumpet-shaped flowers keep opening from late spring through the first frost without any significant pause in production. It is a statement plant, the kind that makes visitors stop walking and actually look. Full sun is non-negotiable for strong blooming. 6 hours of direct sunlight daily is the minimum, less than that an hour. D. The plant grows well enough, but it flowers sparsely, producing the gorgeous glossy foliage with far fewer of the blooms you actually planted it for. Feed every 2 weeks with a high phosphorus fertilizer through the growing season to support that continuous flower production. Water deeply and consistently, but make absolutely sure the drainage is excellent. A Mandevilla sitting in waterlogged soil develops root problems quickly, and the decline from that point moves fast. Vining varieties need support from the start. Put the trellis or stake in place at planting time. Introducing structure to an established Mandevilla without damaging its stems is genuinely difficult and rarely goes cleanly. Mounding varieties stay more compact and perform well in standard pots, without any support structure, a more practical choice for smaller balconies or tighter patio spaces. Container size matters significantly here. Vining varieties need at least a 12 to 14-inch container to dive. Lop the root system that supports vigorous growth and heavy bloom production. A Mandevilla that runs out of root room simply stops flowering, and no amount of fertilizer corrects that until the plant has more space. In cooler zones, bring Mandevilla indoors before the first frost. A mature plant settles into a bright, warm window for winter, without much fuss, and goes back outside the following spring already. Established, performing at a higher level than any new transplant from the garden center, and saving the full replacement cost in the process. Color runs through deep pink, rich red, soft white, and warm apricot. Vining varieties can reach 8 to 10 feet in a single season in warm zones with adequate sun and consistent feeding. That vertical presence is what makes a Mandevilla container genuinely impressive in a way most potted flowers simply cannot match. Flower 7 million bells/Calabracoa. Hanging basket overflowing with a cascade of tiny purple and gold million B. LLS blooms swaying gently. The first time most people see million bells at the garden center, they assume they're looking at a small petunia. Understandable, the flowers look similar at a glance. But Calabracoa is an entirely separate genus, and the practical difference that matters most in container growing is beautifully simple. Million bells is self-cleaning. Spent blooms drop on their own without any deadheading from you. Petunias need consistent deadheading and occasional hard cutting back to stay productive through a long season. That one distinction makes million bells significantly lower maintenance from planting through frost. Its trailing habit makes it one of the strongest performers in hanging baskets and window boxes available in the annual category. Plant 3 or 4 per basket, and by midsummer the basket structure completely disappears beneath a continuous cascade of small blooms in whatever color combination you chose. Deep purple, magenta, coral, soft yellow, pure white. Dozens of bicolor patterns, with new varieties introduced every season. Where million bells does demand your attention is feeding. It is a heavy feeder, and it shows the effects of underfeeding within 2 to 3 weeks. Foliage yellows. Bloom production drops noticeably. A slow-release granular fertilizer worked into the potting mix at planting, combined with liquid feeding every 10 days through the growing season, keeps the plant running at full capacity. Watch for yellowing between the leaf veins, while the veins themselves stay green. That's iron deficiency specifically, and standard fertilizer alone won't correct it. A chelated iron supplement addresses it directly. One counterintuitive tip: avoid large, deep containers for million bells. This plant actually performs better when slightly root-bound. Oversized containers retain moisture longer than the roots want, and they suffer for it. A reasonably sized hanging basket or window box with good drainage suits it are better than a generously proportioned pot. Flower 8 marigold. Golden French marigolds glowing in late afternoon sun, clustered in a terracotta pot. Marigolds get dismissed by experienced gardeners more often than any other plant on this list. Too common, too ordinary, too much of a beginner's plant to take seriously in a thoughtfully designed container display. That dismissal is a mistake, and it costs people one of the most reliable, low-maintenance, genuinely productive flowering plants available for container growing across every climate zone. The key distinction most gardeners miss isn't care, it's variety selection. African marigolds and French marigolds are sold side by side at the garden center, priced similarly, treated as interchangeable. They are not interchangeable in a container. African marigolds grow 2 to 3 feet tall, develop heavy flower heads that make them unstable in pots, and require staking that makes the whole arrangement look effortful and awkward. French marigolds stay compact, typically 8 to 12 inches, bloom heavily, handle container conditions without any structural issues, and maintain a tidy, generous appearance from planting through frost without intervention. For containers, French marigold varieties are the right choice every time. The Bonanza series, Durango series, and Hero series are all well proven in pots. Compact growth, heavy bloom production, heat tolerance that keeps them performing through the hottest weeks of summer when some other container flowers start quietly declining. What they need to perform well is straightforward. Full sun, 6 hours minimum. More produces better results. Moderate watering with good drainage. Let the soil partially dry between waterings rather than keeping it consistently moist. Deadhead spent blooms regularly to maintain continuous flower production, and hold back on the nitrogen. Too much feeding pushes foliage at the expense of flowers, which is the opposite site of what you're growing them for. The natural pest deterrent properties that make marigolds so valuable in vegetable gardens carry over to container groupings as well. A pot of French marigolds placed near container tomatoes, peppers, or herbs on the patio disrupts certain pest populations in the surrounding area. That dual-purpose ornamental display and functional protection gives marigolds a practical value that very few other container flowers match. Placed against blue or purple companions like Calabrachoa or Salvia, the contrast is strong and the visual effect is considerably more sophisticated than the plant's humble reputation suggests. The most common mistake beyond variety selection is insufficient light. A French marigold in partial shade produces acceptable foliage and occasional flowers. The same plant in full sun produces dense, continuous bloom from late spring through hard frost. That gap in performance is significant, and light placement is genuinely the most important decision you'll make for this plant. Flower 9 fuchsia. Slow close-up of pendulous fuchsia blooms hanging in deep red and violet against a shaded porch wall. Fuchsia produces some of the most distinctive flowers of any plant on this entire list. Pendulous, two-toned, almost architectural in structure. A well-grown fuchsia in a hanging basket stops people mid-stride. The flowers hang downward in pairs, an outer tube of one color and an inner skirt of a contrasting shade. Deep red against purple, soft pink against white, coral against warm cream. No other commonly available container plant produces this particular visual effect, and once you understand what fuchsia actually needs, it is far less demanding than its reputation suggests. Shade is the foundation. Partial shade to full shade. Fuchsia belongs in exactly the spots where most flowering plants struggle. Direct afternoon sun bleaches the flowers within days, stresses the foliage, and causes bloom drop that the plant takes weeks to recover from. A covered porch, a north-facing wall, under a deep roof overhang. These are the spaces fuchsia was made for, and in those conditions, it rewards you with a consistency and elegance that earns its space every single season. Consistent moisture is non-negotiable. Fuchsia wilts fast when the soil dries out, and unlike geraniums or nasturtiums, which bounce back reasonably well from a dry spell. A fuchsia that wilts severely loses bloom productivity for an extended period afterward. In warm weather, check the container daily. In a hanging basket exposed to wind and heat, checking twice a day during the hottest weeks may be necessary. Baskets dry out considerably faster than pots sitting on a solid surface. Now, feeding frequency for fuchsia is higher than most other plants on this list. Every week through the bloom season with a high potassium fertilizer, not IV. RE 2 weeks, not monthly, weekly. Potassium supports flower production directly, and a fuchsia without that consistent supply produces noticeably fewer blooms and loses the deep, saturated color that makes the flowers so striking. This weekly feeding schedule is the single most important maintenance habit for getting the best from this plant, and it's the one most container gardeners skip or do inconsistently. Before the plant goes outside in spring, pinch back the growing tips. Each pinched tip produces 2 new branching stems, and those stems each carry flowers. A fuchsia that goes through spring pinching produces a significantly fuller, more floriferous plant through summer than one left to grow unchecked. It feels counterintuitive to cut back a plant you want to grow. The branching that follows makes the case for itself. For hanging baskets, a coir-lined wire basket retains moisture more effectively through hot weather than sphagnum moss, and moisture retention matters practically. iCali for a plant with this level of hydration need. A 12 to 14-inch diameter gives trailing varieties the root room they need to perform through a full season. One last thing about fuchsia: hummingbirds seek it out. In the western United States particularly, a hanging fuchsia basket on a shaded porch becomes a reliable destination through the bloom season. The movement, the color, the sound of wings, it adds a dimension to growing this plant that goes well beyond the flowers themselves. 3 rules for every container. Wide shot of a beautifully arranged patio, diverse containers, late golden hour light. Before we wrap up, 3 rules. These apply to every container on this list, regardless of what you're growing. Rule 1. Match the plant to the light before anything else. Every container failure eventually traces back to this one point. Before a plant goes into a pot, know how many hours of direct sun that specific spot receives on a typical day, and then choose the plant that matches those hours. Sun requirements are not suggestions. A shade plant in full sun and a sun plant in deep shade both underperform in ways that no amount of watering, feeding, or extra care will fully correct. Rule 2. Feed more consistently than you think you need to. Plants in containers don't have access to the living soil ecosystem that sustains plants in the ground. Every nutrient they receive comes directly from what you provide. Underfeeding is the single most common reason container flowers underperform, more common than watering issues, more common than wrong variety selection, more common than poor light placement. A regular feeding schedule maintained through the entire growing season is what separates containers that look genuinely impressive in late summer from ones that look like they've been surviving rather than thriving. Rule 3. Get the container size right. Too small, and the roots run out of room. Bloom production drops. The plant stresses through heat, and no amount of fertilizer compensates for a root system with nowhere left to grow. Too large, and excess soil retains moisture longer than the roots can use. Root rot follows for plants that need good drainage. Match the container size to the mature root system of the plant you're growing, not to what looks visually proportional on planting day. Seedling closing. Soft music rises. A pair of hands settle a geranium into a terracotta pot. Soil. Sunlight. A quiet, contented exhale. 9 flowers. Every one of them proven in containers, across different climates and different spaces. Not one of them complicated to grow when you understand what it actually needs, which is the part that rarely appears on the label at the garden center. The right light, consistent water, regular feeding. A container sized correctly for the plant inside it. Get those 4 things right, and the results speak for themselves from late spring all the way through to the first hard frost. Pause, gentle tone. If you found this useful, subscribe to Rooted Aura. There's more practical, experience-based growing content on its way, the kind built from real soil, real seasons, and real containers, not from what sounds good in a script. And tell me in the comments, which of these 9 are you growing this season? What kind of space are you working with? A balcony, a porch, a front stoop, a windowsill? Drop it down there. Other gardeners reading through those comments are working with the same limitations and the same questions you have. That conversation is worth having. Take care of those containers. The plants inside them are doing everything they can with what you give them.